One of the things I found in my races is that I'm a big believer that to achieve something in 10 years, you got to get going now. In other words, you got to have that vision and then put in place the steps that are going to lead to what you want. And I think in thinking about this, I've often admired your commitment to transportation, because that's something you have to look into the future and persuade people to get going and make big financial commitments. I found that, ironically, a year ago, even when the campaign was reaching an end, we were talking about transportation and congestion, and it just didn't connect. Now it's on the front page of the paper every day. Similarly, I tried to talk about artificial intelligence. I used to joke, the problem with driverless cars is they don't have drivers, and meaning that, it's a talent to be able to explain to people why they need something that maybe they don't expect, or the first question I would get is, we can't afford it, how are we going to pay for it? In other words, it's kind of a not what I think of as an American can-do spirit, but a kind of depressed, it's never going to happen and you're crazy for talking about it. So I was wondering if you could just tell us a bit about your well-known passion for transportation, your leadership on it. I know it's been very frustrating. The North-South Rail Link, which I've come to a number of...
You were nice enough to endorse strongly.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, John Bussinger wouldn't let me get out of the room if I had, but I mean, I totally supported it. I put it in my convention speech because of you and because of him. But anyway, this thought of, what you've done so many times is say, here's where we need to go, and we're going to lay out this money and put in the safeguards. And then we've seen that, blow up or be violated under different other leaders. So help us understand, how do you make that
Well,
deep?
first, I think, Bob, you have to have a vision.
Right.
I don't mean a kind of hazy-daisy vision.
Yeah.
I mean a vision that is achievable within a relatively short period of time.
Right.
Now, if you were to say to me, okay, Dukakis, if you were governor today, what would your vision be for transportation?
Governor, I'd like to ask you that.
My vision would be a first-class regional rail system, not just for Massachusetts, but for New England, that connects every single one of what we now call gateway cities, not just with Boston, but with the rest of the world through the Northeast Corridor. Now, that's not too complicated. And I think the vast majority of our fellow citizens would say, yeah. On the other hand, you've got to have an administration, if you're governor, and people in place who can get going on this. And when I'm told that in order to get South Coast Rail, it's going to take 5 years for permitting, I say to myself, are you serious? Well, you got... Now that takes highly capable people who are not only competent in a transportation sense, but have the political skills to get these things done. Otherwise, why should you be surprised if people say, wow, we're never going to do this, I mean, and I was blessed with a team of folks that knew how to do it. We did billions of dollars of T infrastructure construction. You're familiar with it. I mean, it's now fueling lots of stuff. How do we do that? Well, I had a great transportation secretary, but he recognized that a guy named Frank Kevel, an Irish kid from Dorchester, Northeastern civil engineering co-op student, co-opted at the T, went to work for the T, had the skills to do this job, created something called, Fred called it the Planning and Construction Director, and put Frank Kevel in charge. Kevel did billions of dollars in construction, including the extension of the Red Line, as you will recall, from Harvard Square to Alewife.
Right.
Basically, the North-South Rail Link, 140 feet deep, 3 new stations, a half a mile longer than the North-South Rail Link. And it's transformed, not only has it improved the transportation system, and I think it's working pretty well, but transformed the economy of some of it. Right?
Davis Square is radically
today
different place. Yeah.
Now, how do we do this? Well, first we had a vision. I mean, we had a plan. But secondly, I was blessed with folks who could make it happen. And for reasons I don't understand right now, we've got a transportation situation where we're now told that in order to build the North-South Rail Link, which, to repeat, is basically a Red Line extension, it's going to cost us $12 to $21 billion. The Red Line extension cost us $1.7 billion in current dollars. Los Angeles is building itself a new transit system. It has something they call the regional connector. It's basically the north-south rail link. It's under construction. It's going to be completed next year. $1.6 billion.
So what do you think about the arguments that keep getting trotted out that it's too expensive, and the study that showed
well,
that?
Well, if the people that you got, I mean, for one thing, who's the Frank Kevel in the current administration? I mean, who's the person? It's not that they don't have good engineering talent. They have a chief engineer, happens to be a graduate of Northeastern, where I've taught for the past 30 years. But
Go Huskies.
But it's all, it's all consultant driven when it comes to these projects. That's a recipe for disaster. Not that you don't need consultants, but there has to be a Kevel who's driving the process. And by the way, on the harbor cleanup, how did we do that? Had a chief engineer at the MWRA. We use consultants, but a top-notch chief engineer at the MWRA who ran the job came in on time, Bob, and 20% under budget. So these are really quite doable. But do we have a vision these days? I mean,
no.
Putting tolls on one lane on our highways? I mean, what is this?
Yeah.
This is ridiculous.
Could you briefly just pitch to our audience like the quick benefits of the north-south rail link so they can help us advance this cause?
Well, it's more than just the north-south rail link. We're talking about a regional rail system which connects every major region of Massachusetts and New England, and shouldn't cost a lot of money because the rail is there. These are all existing rail lines. They may need some modernization, but they're there. You don't have to take a house, you don't have to take a business or any of this kind of stuff. Okay, so it's not as if this is that difficult. And what would it do? It would knit New England together. It would take thousands of cars' time off the road. I mean, north-south rail link by itself would take 65,000, 70,000 cars off the road. Wow. I mean, think what that would do for congestion in what is now one of the most congested metropolitan areas in the country. And do it in a way that's environmentally, Bob, far superior to self-driving cars, which, by the way, can't work because there's only so much capacity in the highways, and I don't care whether there's a driver behind the wheel or there isn't a driver behind the wheel. There's only a limited number of people, a limited number of vehicles you can accommodate. You go to Europe, you go to the Far East, you get on public transportation systems and high-speed rail that are wonderful, and we come back to the United States, we're losing the ability to do this because we're not doing it very often. There was a story in the New York Times not too long ago about how it's now going to cost us $15 billion for the so-called Gateway Project in New York, which is more tunnels and that a virtually identical project in Paris was going to cost 20% of the estimated $15 billion for the New York project. What does that tell you? It tells you the United States of America, we're spending $750 billion in the military for reasons I'm not sure I understand. But we can't match our friends in Europe when it comes to building and maintaining excellent public transportation. I mean, that's embarrassing and it's unacceptable.
Governor, we are reaching the end of our conversation, and I'd like to bring you back to the core theme of the show, creating the world we want. And I'm wondering if you could, from your experience, but also your continuing vision for the future, help our audience understand or explain to them how they can embrace that role, particularly around the big issues that are dominating so many people's mind now: climate change, whether young people, millennials, even have a role in the economy because they're being frozen out of housing and have a huge educational debt. So it looks like a very deep set of problems, and yet there's also a nerve that is struck when we say creating the world we want, not the world we got stuck with, not the world that we just have to suffer through. So what would you like to say to our audience that are looking for that way to move their growing despair into engagement and leadership, which frankly, I have to say, I don't think my generation has offered enough of.
Well, to begin with, I hope we understand that we've got a great, great new generation of young people who, in my opinion, and I've been on this planet for 85 years and worked with young people for a long time, are as wonderfully motivated and as idealistic as any generation of young people I can remember. And secondly, while obviously climate change is an existential issue, I mean, we're destroying our planet here. As you know, I have very strong feelings about the international situation, American foreign policy, which I think is nuts these days. 837 American bases in 150 countries. Doing what? Other than spending our money. And looking for enemies all the time. What is this notion that we've got to be engaged perpetually in war? With whom? For what? So, as we move ahead, Bob, on critical climate problems, and I'm serious about this, I want us to see if this country can play a major role in creating a world in which war is ruled out as a means for settling disputes between and among countries. It just so happens, and it may sound strange because of all the noise, that this happens to be, from a war-making standpoint, the most peaceful world in history. May sound strange with all the stuff, right? But in point of fact, there is less armed conflict today on the planet Earth than there ever has been. But the notion of first spending huge amounts of money on weapons of war which would destroy if you think climate change is going to destroy the country, how about nuclear? And we have a new Secretary of Defense seriously talking about putting intermediate range nuclear missiles now in Asia. What the hell is he talking about? Is he serious? While we have hundreds and hundreds of American bases all over the world. Doing what? I don't know, getting into trouble. So, if you were to say to me, of all the things I would like to see happen, what's my most important vision? A world in which war is ruled out as a means for settling disputes between and among countries. And we stop spending trillions on weapons of war and start spending them on the kind of thing that I think most of us think is important.
So one of our last questions here, when I was in the State House, I was an intern, and I asked you this, and you gave a beautiful answer. I think we're all on the same page as humanity. How do we go out there and actually address that and build? And your answer was centered around strengthening international coalitions. So building off that answer, it seems like democracy is almost under siege across the world. And there's, maybe tactical players that are playing roles in that. But how do we counter that? How do we embrace that we're all in this together as humans?
John, we stop engaging in a foreign policy which thinks it has to intervene all over the world and is creating the conditions for what you are describing. If we had never invaded Iraq, one of the dumbest things we've ever done, we wouldn't have millions of refugees pouring into Europe, roiling the political waters, having to leave their homes. There are 65,000 of them in my dad's home island, on the island of Lesbos, just sitting there, refugees. The result of what? The result of American intervention, stupidly, in that war in Iraq, and now in Afghanistan, where we've been for 16 years? And we keep doing it. And with rare exceptions, keep getting into trouble. Now, what does this mean? It means not retreating from the world. It means being deeply and actively involved in creating a world with a strong UN, and if we didn't have it, we'd have to invent it, and strong international institutions which can resolve these disputes, and we'll have them, needless to say, without armed warfare. So we got a trade problem with China. Yeah? But they're now in the World Trade Organization, thanks, among other things, to us. And the World Trade Organization has an interesting set of rules and ways of getting things done. Why aren't we working hard at the WTO to deal with these problems? And by the way, we subsidize certain producers in the United States as well. You know, they're not the only people that do this. When it comes to dealing with this nuclear threat, I thought the way the Iranian nuclear agreement was negotiated was exactly the way the system ought to work. The UN was deeply and actively involved, the Security Council unanimously supporting it, Russia and China actively involved in the process, and we got ourselves a pretty impressive agreement. Then we get a president who first walks away from the agreement. We broke it, right? And then imposes sanctions on Iran. Would you explain this to me? I mean, we're the ones that broke the agreement, not the Iranians. I mean, the International Atomic Energy Agency said that they had strictly complied with every single part of that agreement. And we're now imposing sanctions on them. Look, if we continue to do this, and you know, Trump's trade policy is nuts, and we're starting to see just how nutty it is, you know, in an economic sense. You know, it's a small industry, but talk to the cranberry farmers in Massachusetts and ask them how they're doing under this trade agreement with retaliatory tariffs being imposed by China. Didn't he know that this was going to happen? Didn't he know that the Chinese were trying to devalue their currency and wipe out the effect of his, and a tariff is a tax, and it's not paid by China. I mean, he's under some delusion, or illusion, that somehow the Chinese are paying it. No, the American consumer is paying it. This is a national sales tax, basically, and we're calling it a tariff. But I think the opportunities with a new administration and new leadership to build the kind of world we're talking about, and I'm serious, a world where armed conflict no longer will be used to solve these problems, is not only quite doable, now's the time to do it before we end up with a situation where we not only have serious climate change problems, but, you know, wouldn't take 50 nuclear weapons to destroy the planet. And I just, you know, obviously I feel strongly about this, but when I think of the world before the invasion of Iraq by the United States, and I look at it now, you look at these issues and ask yourself, how many of them were the direct result of that stupid move, which, by the way, turned out to be based on false information. Anyway, sorry to go on a great length, but
Governor, we are, I'm so sorry that we have to bring this to a close because I continue to learn from you and be inspired by your attitude and your clarity. And I would just like to say to our audience, I hope you, if you didn't before, now appreciate what a state treasure, what a national treasure Michael Dukakis, and I'll say Kitty Dukakis, for her leadership on mental health and so many other issues. So, Governor, I always, when I listen to you, I kind of rededicate myself to working on these questions, and I just want to thank you. I know all of our team here, and I want to say to our viewers, this is wrapping up our first season where we've had some extraordinary guests. I hope if you haven't had the chance to look at some of our other interviews, you'll do that. And we expect to be coming back in a few months with a new season, but we are honored to have such an extraordinary, accomplished leader to talk to today, who really did create a world, work toward creating the world that he wanted and that we want. Tom, do you have a last message to our folks? It's
been an honor to engage in this conversation here today and engage in a conversation with all of you out there. You know, as we've stated continuously over and over, our mission is to engage together, educate each other through conversation, and really build towards the world we want. And we can only do that together. So as Governor Dukakis has said, this is the time that we can do it. We need to be bold. We need to be courageous. We need to really work together to create the world we want. And in solidarity, we're signing off for season 1. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Governor.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah.
Thanks, Governor. Thanks, Tom. Thank you.